But the people who are born here, who have Irishness, have the blood of Ireland in their veins, and the thoughts of Irish culture in their heads and in their hearts. Shut up is the answer to those people. Shut up, we have taken over your country. So we are, in effect, for all the purposes, intents and purposes, we are actually recolonized now.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thank you so very much for tuning in. Now, before we begin this important interview with John Waters and Gemma O'Doherty, just a quick word from this interview's sponsor. Collagen may be the closest thing we'll ever get to a real fountain of youth. In fact, many experts now agree that collagen is crucial to renewing and revitalizing how you look and feel. Collagen is the most abundant protein in your body, and it's essentially the glue that holds you together. In fact, after age 20, people produce about 12% less collagen in their skin each and every decade. This means by the time you're middle age, you could be producing less than half the collagen you did in your youth. Even worse, things like poor diet, smoking, pollution, and yes, stress can delete your collagen levels even faster. So visit my site, healthwithsgt.com, and purchase the only collagen on the market that I trust. Make your hair healthy and younger looking, support joint flexibility, strengthen nails, teeth, and gums, promote strong, healthy muscles, tendons, and ligaments, stronger bones, and digestive health. Support your health today with collagen. I'll leave the link below this interview. And we're back. Friends, thank you so very much for tuning in. Boy, are we under attack like never before. The world is waking up to what's going on with this current horror show, and there are freedom fighters around the world, like my friends in Ireland, John Waters, the former journalist and best-selling author, and Gemma O'Doherty, and they join us right now to break it all down. How are you guys?
Hi, Sean. It's
Hello,
great
Sean.
to be back.
How you doing?
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And Gemma, thanks for your Twitter personal message yesterday asking to come on. We made time today to make this happen, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing. The lockdowns around the world are hurting people way more than any virus could ever hurt people. And the two of you have launched a constitutional challenge to Ireland's COVID-19 lockdown measures. And thank God you're doing it. Somebody needs to take action against these tyrants. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Sean. Hi. We're trying to. We've submitted an application for leave for a judicial review, which essentially means that the job that wasn't done in the beginning by the Parliament here, the Oireachtas, two houses, the president who signed the bill without questioning it, he has the capacity, he has the powers to refer it to the Supreme Court. He didn't do that. The press have not questioned it. This is like unprecedented in our experience and our knowledge of anything in Ireland's history, in freedom anyway. That's 100 years almost. And people are locked in their houses now. They can only go out on under certain conditions. They can be stopped by the police if they drive. They can only walk 2 kilometers from their homes. Police have been seen moving people on from park benches if they see them sitting down. If they see them out lying on a towel on a piece of grass, they move them along. People are being arrested for fishing, and quite forcibly in one particular instance that I saw. This is like a complete suspension of the rule of law, a complete suspension of democratic rights, complete suspension of fundamental freedoms. And it seems in Ireland, because we have a constitution, a written constitution, suspension of the constitution. And so this started just before Easter here. The real hard, it was we had a bit of soft lockdown first, if you call it that. And then they brought in these laws and these regulations, which seem to be completely arbitrary, which seem to have very, very fragile basis in law. But the extraordinary thing is that the show of force that accompanies them is quite startling. We were in court last week, in the Four Courts, which is our central court in Dublin. There was like a ring of steel around the building. Like I've never seen so many cops in Ireland in the same place. And there was prison vans on standby. There was squad cars everywhere. There was guns, cops with guns. And our supporters who tried to get into the courtroom were banned from the courtroom. The public is being barred from our courtroom at least, if not from other courtrooms as well. We're not clear because some courtrooms are allowing the public in. But it is under the Irish Constitution completely unconstitutional not to have members of the public in the courtroom, or not to have the court open to members of the public who wish to come. And that's been thrown out. So it seems that we have basically, and this is something that I've noticed in watching the situation in other places, in some certain states in America, in the United Kingdom, certainly in France, Italy and Spain, where there's like the law is being made up on the cuff, on the hoof, and off the cuff, and people are just, these authorities, politicians, judges, police officers are literally writing the law as they go along and telling it to your face, to people's faces. And I've never seen anything like this before. And that's why we really felt it was absolutely, like we would have been, like, in a certain sense between us, like we're, this would not be the first thing we would think of spending our, April and May afternoons doing. But nobody else did it. I mean, this is the astonishing thing in Ireland, and I think this has been pretty commonplace, not entirely, but because, like, there's been no voice of sanity to come out, say a former Minister for Justice and former Attorney General somewhere, a former judge, which you would have expected to happen, senior lawyers, nothing. And here, absolutely no voice. The only voices that you can hear are these voices condemning us for doing what they should have been doing themselves. There was an excellent contribution in the United Kingdom from Lord Sumption, who was a former judge of the Supreme Court there. And he basically said, this is a police state. He says it's the worst thing that he's ever seen. It's the worst thing probably ever happened in British history in terms of the incursions upon the rights and fundamental freedoms of people. He said, people are saying, he said last week that, the people are saying this is the worst thing that happened since World War II. He says, well, it's much worse than that. He says they didn't do that and they do this in World War II. People were not confined to their homes. They were not restricted all the time in terms of what they could do and what they could. And absolutely, I mean, people did not have their shopping bags searched by police officers in World War II. I mean, this is the thing, Sean. I mean, people are saying to me, about different things recently, and there's a lot of conspiracy theory about this, and so on, about the New World Order and whatever. People have different theories, and I have an open mind and all that, and I'm still absorbing information from myself. But I say, if I was to say to you 6 months ago that the time was coming within a year that we would be told to stay in our houses, not to go out, that unless we had really essential business or exercise, and that we could be stopped by police officers asking us where we were coming from, where we were going, that if we sat on a park bench with a book to read it, we'd be told to move along, that we would have our shopping bags searched, that we would be, if we stopped at a riverside and went fishing, we would be moved on. People would say, oh, come on, that's conspiracy theory. That's crazy. Come off it. Well, here we are. So what's next is the next question. And I just can't tell you, because I think the only thing you can say about what might happen in these conditions is try to think of the most unlikely thing you can possibly imagine happening, and it'll be that.
Well, this is what I've been worried about, and I've been saying the exact same thing, John. Just 3 or 4 months ago, this was unimaginable. This was not possible 6 months ago, and yet Here we are. And I want to read a little bit from your article here in just a second, but you mentioned World War II. Do you know what I heard recently? These central banks have now printed more money than all of the money from all of the nations that was spent to wage World War II. And I just saw on Zero Hedge the other day, the central bank in our nation, the Federal Reserve, privately owned by international criminal bankers, has printed, and here's their punchline, they think this is funny, $6.66 trillion on the back of this pandemic. So on the back of this pandemic, they have locked down nations, economies, they're hurting real people and small businesses while Jeff Bezos flourishes. They're printing the US dollar into oblivion, and our neighbors to the north in Canada have just had their guns seized by the Prime Minister, I like to call the hand of the Queen, Justin Trudeau. So this is a slippery slope into absolute despotism, and slippery is actually too kind. This has been a plummet into despotism.
Yeah.
Completely. I actually watched your video there earlier, Sean, outlining what was going on in Canada. I mean, Ireland, I've said to you probably before that Ireland is the Arkansas of Europe. It's the 51st state. And many of the big tech, big pharma companies have their the American ones have their European headquarters here, their EMEA headquarters, European, Middle East and African, and they get away with literally murder here. They can do whatever they want. We know that the Clintons have a number of residences here that they use. We know that John Brennan is back and forth here. And it's very, very concerning. And that's one of the reasons why we really are reaching out to the United States, where we have a huge diaspora. And, you know, you only have to look at many of the names involved in the current controversies surrounding what's going on over there with the Democrats. Many of them have Irish surnames. But we really do want these companies to go back home. We hope President Trump will take them back home. They're destroying our free speech. They're making vaccines here which are killing and injuring children badly. And they can do what they want here. They can do what they want in Ireland. And it's just a few hours over the Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, let's just add to that. I mean, we have an entirely unprincipled political class now that is basically breaking Ireland up for scrap and selling it off to the highest bidder, or even the lowest bidder very often, depending on how much is in it for themselves. Like, you know, Americans in general, I think, probably are a little bit behind in terms of understanding Ireland, because perhaps many of them, I think, and from talking to them, have a very romantic idea of Ireland, the way Ireland used to be, this beautiful place, this kind of quaint, kind of old-fashioned place, which was Catholic, which was kind of deeply nationalistic, deeply patriotic, that had struggled for a very long time to gain freedom and appreciated that freedom. This could not be further from the reality of Ireland now, under the influence of the forces that Gemma has talked about. That these companies, Google and Facebook and Twitter, and these big tech companies, following on from the big pharma companies who have been here for much longer, have essentially moved in on our culture and our country and taken it over, and basically decided that they want to turn this into a kind of laboratory for the world, to show how they can make a country change radically in a very short time and hold this up as a trophy country to the world. And they're doing that. They did that in relation to a number of referendums in the past decade, in particular the so-called marriage equality referendum of 2015, which basically took a sledgehammer to Article 41 in the Constitution, which was to do with family and parenting, and turned it into a joke. And the same happened in 2018 in relation to Article 40, which had a clause concerning the rights to life of the unborn child, which was a natural law right, and was only in the Constitution not as a raised up right in that context, but as simply a memo, if you like, to let people know that this existed. It went in 1983 as a precautionary measure by the as a result of a campaign by pro-life people. But that
we were a profoundly pro-life nation, Sean. We were incredibly proud of the fact that we were pro-life. With Malta, I think we were the only country in Europe that was. And George Soros came in here and he funded the, pro-abortion campaign. And now we have one of the most liberal forms. I suspect the referendum was probably rigged. But it's absolute, and that, as I say, this is why we need to reach out to President Trump. Yes. And because American companies have come in here, George Soros has come in here, the Clintons have come in here, Brennan and all of them, and they have turned our country upside down. And sadly, the fact that we speak English, that is the reason. It was very attractive, very well-educated workforce. But of course, the Googles and the Facebooks don't even employ Irish people anymore. The whole idea was that we would allow them in here so they would create jobs for Irish people. They don't. Google employs about probably 85% migrant, the cheap slave labor force, which they have brought in. They are ripping down some of the most beautiful architecture in Dublin. They've taken over a whole quarter, very historic area. In fact, today we remember our patriots who died so that we could be an independent republic. They were murdered today by the forces of the British Crown in 1916. So it's 104 years. And part of the area that Google have taken over is where the Easter Rising took place in 1916. These companies have absolutely no respect for our very proud history, long fought over nearly a millennium. We fought in Ireland to get the British out. And now we have been taken over by these big tech, big pharma, multinationals who tell our government what to do, when to do it, and the government says, how high, we will jump, whatever you want.
And there's another difficulty of that as well, Sean, which is that the power of these big tech companies in relation to communications and information and channels of discussion, the control over those, and also the control they have registered over the existing media, which is profoundly corrupt. I mean, we watch from a distance, obviously, and see the American situation, and of course the American mainstream media, the newspapers and CNN, etc. They're completely corrupt. We can see this very clearly. But there are counterbalancing forces, not just on YouTube and elsewhere, but also within even the mainstream media itself, magazines, etc. Fox News to an extent, although it's somewhat deteriorating in that sense, I think. But we have nothing like that. So in a sense, we have a monolithic voice, a convocation of all of these people pushing an agenda. So there's absolutely no chance of combating them in the normative way in democratic terms, because there is no democracy. And in the, it is well known that for well over something like at least 5 years, it is known that there is over 500,000 additional votes on the register of Ireland that nobody can account for. 500,000. Now that doesn't sound a lot in American terms. In Irish terms, where you have a 4.5 million population.
No, that's a huge number. That's a gigantic number. I know. They steal elections. They stack the deck against the people. They've been doing it forever. You know, these social media companies are obviously a huge problem in Ireland. They're a huge problem here, too. YouTube is, again, deplatforming people. They're banning free speech or speech they don't like. So now there is a high cost to speech. It's no longer free. But let me ask you this. Is perhaps even the bigger problem in Ireland from a cultural standpoint, is it that since 1973, Ireland has been a member state of the EU? Is that a bigger problem? Because that really, to me, seems to be the source of so many problems in Europe.
Yeah, that is definitely the problem. I mean, that's kind of, in a sense, the original problem. I mean, just brief potted history of what arose there. I mean, we got our independence 99 years ago, and we got it possibly at the worst possible time that we could have got it, in the sense that it came, as we now know, between two world wars, and the rest of the world was preoccupied with all kinds of other stuff. So we got very little support as a new independent nation. And we struggled along for several decades, right up to the 50s, going from bad to worse, really. Never got off the ground economically. And I think a consensus developed then that at that point, that Ireland was, in a sense, a failed entity, that it was naturalistically incapable of self-sustenance. That was, I think, the defeatist attitude that developed, because so many of our people were hemorrhaging still, right into the 1950s, leaving Ireland for America and Britain. And therefore, what is a reflex of post-colonial nations is to find a new dependency. That was really what became uppermost. And two factors arose then in the 60s. One was a desire to join the European Union, or to become part of Europe, as it's called, where of course it's not Europe in any sense other than in some kind of quasi-political sense. But the other one then was what they call foreign direct investment. That's this policy inviting all the transnationals in to create jobs here and pay minimal tax, but nevertheless create employment. And of course, they're not paying any tax, but they're not creating any employment either, very much. And so, but the European Union was the thing which really was used by politicians to, present this idea that they were modern and progressive and so on, that this was the way to be, that it was better to call yourself European than call yourself Irish, that it didn't even seem to be possible to be both at the same time, which I always felt I was. And so this kind of propaganda campaign has been going on, and this kind of creep of, particularly with the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, really was the handing over almost entirely of our sovereignty in that regard, economically at least. We're still subject to the Freudian slip, Maastricht criteria, which stipulates about all kinds of stuff about your economy, which means that you don't actually have autonomy over the levers of your economy. So what that has done more fundamentally, I think this is probably the worst thing, and it's what I came in on about the absolute kind of unprincipled nature of our political class, that it attracted into politics a particular cadre of people and did not attract the kind of people that once we would have associated with politics in Ireland. You know, the people that Gemma talked about, like Pádraig Pearse, who was executed 104 years ago this very day, and Michael Collins and all those guys, you know, who right up to maybe the 50s, you had this caliber of man. Even though that things were bad, they were people of the highest principle and character. Now you have an exact opposite of that. You have people without principle. You have people who have no loyalty to anything other than their overlords, who are in control of their destinies, and they're answerable only to them. And they treat the Irish people with contempt, even though the Irish people seem not to see this. And they regard democracy as a huge problem, a nuisance. You know, that you actually have to ask the people what they think from time to time, what they want. My goodness, what an imposition on our trajectory as great leaders in the world. You know, this is the mentality. And when you have a referendum, it's like, what, you're going to oppose it? You think you're entitled to oppose it? We're going to demonize you. We're going to destroy you. We're going to destroy your livelihood, your reputation. I took part in 3 referendums in the past decade against the government. And you're always given the no side. You're always the naysayer, you see. This is part of the trickery. But as a result of that, I've left journalism in Ireland. I resigned from journalism in Ireland on the day after the count in the marriage equality so-called referendum of 2015, which is a total travesty at every conceivable level. It allowed a bunch of thugs essentially to take over Ireland, riding roughshod over every principle, every democratic freedom, threatening people, menacing people, demonizing people. I'm talking about the LGBT goons, who are now, of course, big gay, the worldwide phenomenon. So this is what's happened to our beautiful country, you know. It's been absolutely decimated by these scumbags, frankly, pardon my French. And
we were told, because we had this very strong Catholic heritage, Sean, you know, we were known as the land of saints and scholars. We were the people who held on to Christianity when it was, you know, breaking down on the continent, and our monks were out in the Atlantic on little islands, keeping, you know, writing the Bible, keeping the ancient scripts going when the rest of Europe was on its knees, and civilization was breaking down. So we had this incredibly strong Catholic heritage, but that has been used against us for the last 20 years as a weapon, where, you know, young people have been indoctrinated into believing that this was the worst possible thing, and that it was so repressive, and the Irish were down it. Little did, you know, certainly John and I have discussed this many times. We grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and, you know, there was no element of repression whatsoever. But we grew up in a deeply moral, wasn't perfect, but it was a moral country where you had a strong sense of right and wrong, where your religious practice was very important. And we were, you know, effectively 99% Catholic. And we were very proud of that, because along with our right to be Irish in the face of British colonialism, it was the right to be Irish and Catholic. You know, we had an expression during the famine when they tried to starve and successfully starved at least 1 million of our people. The Irish were offered, you know, the soup from the British forces, take the soup. And that meant to renounce your Catholic faith, which many people obviously refused to do. So that is what they have done. They have taken what was the best thing about our country and they have destroyed it. But thankfully, it's coming back. And I'm very grateful to so many American patriots for lighting the flame of Christianity in the West again. It's this rebirth of Christianity is not coming from Europe this time. It's coming from North America, from the United States. And this is wonderful, especially in relation to traditional Catholicism.
Yes.
You know, the Latin Mass, all of the things that were sort of eradicated when we were children. This is all coming back thanks to America. So there's so many great things happening from the land of the free, which we're so grateful for.
Absolutely. And let me just say, Logos rising, in the words of E. Michael Jones, right? We have to get back to Logos, because the people that have usurped the sovereignty of nations around the world, they hate truth. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. I saw it earlier today.
All right, I want to play it because I want our neighbors in Canada to understand the power behind the Prime Minister. Hopefully you can hear this.
I, Justin P.J. Trudeau, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors. So help me God. I, Justin P.J. Trudeau, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as a member of Her Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in Council.
I'll pause it there, and I want to quote him for the audience, our friends in Canada, our friends in Australia who had their guns seized on the back of a lone shooter not that long ago. He says, "The Queen of Canada."
Do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors. So help me God.
Do you know how many Canadians I've talked to who don't understand where the real power resides? To this very day, they think the Queen is ornamental. These people were just disarmed on Friday by this Prime Minister, the hand of the Queen, who pledged his fealty and secrecy and pledged an oath not to the people of Canada but to the Queen. How does that make you feel, John?
Pretty relieved that we got shot at those people.
We didn't. Look, Drew Harris, explain about him.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course, yeah, we have still some residues, and there's a kind of a resurgence of different things. I mean, we have now the commissioner of our police force on Garda Síochána is a man called Drew Harris, who was a member of the RUC, which is probably the most notorious police force in Europe for many, many years, which was involved as a centre of the Troubles, so-called, in Northern Ireland from the late 60s to 1998. And he's now in charge of our police force. And you can see the change immediately on the face of things, where we had an unarmed police force in Ireland for until recently, except for fighting terrorism and gang criminals and so on. But the police on the beat never carry guns. Now some of them do. And they're going around for the last couple of weeks in particular, since the lockdown, you can see they're very visible on the streets with these guns. In other words, menacing ordinary citizens going about their everyday business. So yeah, we do have you see, these are all parts of the things that we have watched for some years. And they all come back to one fundamental thing, which is the lack of patriotism now in our culture, and particularly among our political class. And I suspect the same thing applies in Canada, that the idea of being patriotic to your own country has become anathema to culturally as a result of the propagandizing and the corrupt media and so on. And I've watched this and felt this for many, many years, this slow drip, drip, drip against the heroic history of Ireland, against the heroic figures in Irish history. There will be no commentary about today, the momentous day that today was, that probably the worst day in Irish history. In the whole hundreds of years of trauma that Irish history suffered, I would say that the worst day in the whole thing was May the 3rd, 1916. And that was the day that Pádraig Pearse was mowed down by a firing squad in Kilmainham. That this man, who understood better than any other figure, probably of all time, the nature of Ireland's situation, psychologically, spiritually, and otherwise, was mowed down by those people. And in the absence of such thinking, our country is basically unraveling, and has been unraveling now for many years. There was one factor we didn't really touch on there, and that's the surreptitious, gradual dilution of the Irish population for the past 2 decades by immigration, by stealth, under all kinds of headings, spurious headings. Students coming from all over the world under student visas and never leaving. The people who come to work for the multinationals, who are overwhelmingly, in some cases, 95% in some cases, non-Irish nationals. All of these, and the handing out of citizenship as if it were Smarties. I don't know if you know what Smarties are, but
I do. It's a candy. Yeah, I know.
Every few months. for a payment, you pay to buy citizenship, and then you're called Irish. And this is the key, that there has been, as part of this, two things: a refusal to allow a forbidden, an absolute prohibition on discussing even the fact that this is happening to the Irish people. And then a kind of gaslighting process whereby we are told that these people who come here are Irish from the moment that they set foot on the land of Ireland, and they are called the New Irish, which is one of the greatest insults I've ever heard to my Irishness and to the Irishness of any self-respecting Irish person, that somebody can come from China or Nigeria or somewhere and be calling themselves Irish the next day after their arrival. And this is approved of. Not only is it approved of, but it's actually the consequence of the agitation of NGOs who actually train these people into thinking in this way and speaking in this way to Irish people, who then are obliged or enjoined to accept this as the nature of things. And the result of this is a kind of sense that has been imposed on the Irish people, that they no longer own their own country. Right. That they're Thomas Davis, our great hero before Pearse, as said, he once said, this Ireland of ours is no sandbank. Well, now it is a sandbank. It's just a piece of territory on which people move, of whatever description or whatever origin, move over and back doing business. But the people who are born here, who have Irishness, have the blood of Ireland in their veins, and the thoughts of Irish culture in their heads and in their hearts, shut up is the answer to those people. Shut up. We have taken over your country. So we are, in effect, for all the purposes, intents and purposes, we are actually recolonized now. Yeah. By forces, a coalition of forces, which includes, the aforementioned corporations, the EU, the NGOs, who are the internal administrators of this colonialism, and our own quisling government of cretins, who in this present crisis now are beginning at last to reveal themselves to the ordinary people. At least this is the one silver lining that will emerge from this whole thing, perhaps, is that now people can look at these guys day and daily and say, he is a cretin.
Yeah, they've totally exposed themselves, and we would have gotten the same thing here if Hillary Clinton had become president. Open borders, immigration on demand from coast to coast. Don't question any of it, because if you do, they'll call you a racist or xenophobic. Now, we see their playbook for what it is, but let's just get back to the problem at hand right now, and that is these lockdowns. 3, 4, 5 months ago, this was unthinkable. And you wrote in your article here, John, firstthings.com, Gemma O'Doherty and I seek a judicial review of the enabling legislation and regulations and an injunction or declaration to bring it all to an end. You're talking about the COVID-19 lockdown. In Ireland, as in many countries, we are rapidly discovering that we have been misled, that the COVID-19 pandemic is not remotely as serious as our leaders with attendant experts have been enjoining us to accept. I couldn't agree more, and you know what really troubles me, and I do love our president. He's a hell of a lot better than Hillary Clinton, but what troubles me here in this country, guys, is that Dr. Fauci is still employed. The woman who's devoted, 2,000 square feet to hideous scarves, Birks, she's still a mouthpiece. I don't understand why those two haven't been kicked out on their tails, and while they're at it, why hasn't Bill Gates been arrested? Because he wants us all to shelter in place for 18 months as he preps a vaccine that he expects will be rolled out globally and probably would like to make it mandatory. So there's bigger fish to fry here than sitting back and just trusting the plan that all is going well.
Yeah, I mean, my information about what's happening in the States is largely informed by your channel, Sean, and it's deeply, deeply distressing. Also, we're very concerned about President Trump's position on 5G, obviously, and mandatory vaccines. But I wonder, I've listened to many of your guests, and some of them have the position that he's putting these people out on stage. He isn't really choosing them, but that he is putting them out there for the world to see and how corrupt they are and all of their connections. But he's also showing to a degree that I think his hands are tied. And I have on many an occasion forgiven him and said, okay, he's done a hell of a lot better. The situation is extremely difficult. He's brought down the fake news. He's brought down the Democrats, the Clintons, obviously. As much as he can. He's very strong on child trafficking, paedophilia. He's obviously brought so much employment back to America and got so many people millions off food stamps. So and of course, obviously, he's not interested. He wants to bring troops home, peace with North Korea, etc. So he's achieved so much. So I just do feel I'm very pleased that he's supporting people who are speaking out against the lockdown, the Michigan protesters. So we just have to, I think his hands are tied to a degree, but I feel he's doing as best as he can, possibly. I mean, without him, there's no hope for the world. He is the only hope for the world at the moment.
Yeah, what I feel, Sean, there is watching him. I've been watching him quite a lot, particularly in the early stages of the nightly press conferences. And I have a sense that he's like almost a prisoner. I suppose, my understanding of it, that American politics, even though he's president, that there is a much more powerful force behind him, and that seems to be the permanent government, which is essentially democratic in its essence, and that the deep state and so forth. And is that he has this difficulty that, of course, he can do other things if he gets another term in office, but this pandemic could be the unseating of him unless he plays it very carefully. And so he had to go along with a lot of things that he might have called out in different circumstances. For example, if he was in the second term, and that he's treading very carefully in case that he becomes unseated, because he is up against possibly the most corrupt press in the world, apart from the Irish one. And I cannot give you that. That he's now waiting his chance, but above all, he needs to come through this as a competent president, which I believe he is. I mean, his performance, I think, has been excellent insofar as, despite the fact the attempts by the media to present him as incompetent and so on, he was the one who closed off China at the earliest stage, closed off Europe at a very early stage, closed off United Kingdom and Ireland. So he did all the things that almost nobody else did at that early stage, and yet he's being condemned by these people.
And his defunding of the World Health Organization is just phenomenal.
Yes, it is. But just a minute, again, to look at the States, if you look closely, there's two things I would say about it. It's very interesting when you see the corruption of newspapers. Like the New York Times is a league table, as it were, of the pandemic, and the United States at the very top of it. Now, I can tell you for certainty, that's done on an absolute figures basis. If Barack Obama was the name of the president, they would be doing it on a per capita basis, which would have the United States probably 2/3 down the table. And so that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is that all of the worst hotspots in this pandemic in the United States are states run by Democrat governors. So that's, again, a factor that's never mentioned. But I think he's done an amazing job. There's been a couple of really bad spots, New York, and we know all about that, but I don't see how they can lay that at the president's door. I do hope, I mean, as Gemma says, I mean, we watch with bated breath this, because our whole lives, the freedoms of the world depend on Donald Trump being re-elected president of the United States. Without that, nothing. Without that, nothing. And so the revolution that is happening in Europe, which Ireland will be the last place it will reach, but perhaps it will reach eventually, that depends on Donald Trump being the figurehead to continue for another 4 years, so that some form of transition, cultural transition, may take place away from this corrupt so-called liberalism, which has destroyed the world as we live in it now.
Well, we shall see how this all shakes out. Again, just a few months ago, we couldn't have imagined ourselves in this situation. And what concerns me, and Gemma, if you watched my last video there, the interview that I did with Crow, I did play that warning coming from someone in Spain. And yeah, these people are on lockdown. They've been separated from each other. They can't communicate. It's now against the law to go outside for any reason. I mean, is this how liberty dies around the world, with a whimper?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, I always find myself, Sean, coming back to one factor in all of these things, and that's the absence of press, of a media. I mean, the fourth estate. I mean, if you have that, then you make all the other institutions more honest. Maybe not perfectly honest, but more honest. So scrutiny on those institutions is the thing that keeps them democratic, keeps them freedom-loving, keeps them, just and truthful, relatively anyway. And none of that is present now, because everything is published. Things are published now only on the basis of the agenda they serve, and the person that they either serve or attack. And these are the criteria that you find, that if the president says something loosely worded, it's turned into a massive controversy that most people never understand, but are left with an aftertaste, which is pejorative to the president. And that's the whole objective. But in the course of this pandemic, it has been very interesting that it's almost as if nobody has any common sense left. That the fundamental thought that would have occurred to a 9-year-old child at the very outset was that if you actually do all these things to a society, you're going to have serious economic problems. Arising from those serious economic problems, you're going to have serious health service problems, and that's going to result in increased illness and death. You're going to have what you people in America call it, I think we don't have a concept like this, but we ought to have in Europe, deaths of despair, that's inevitable out of that. And in the end, if you create an alternative calculus for this, hypothetical perhaps, but nevertheless it can be ascertained with reasonable accuracy as a prediction, much better, I think, than the kind of predictions we were dealing with in this pandemic, you will see that the cost of this, not just measured economically, financially, but measured in human lives, will be many times greater than the cost from what is in effect a pretty serious cold that goes to the chest in some instances and cause serious damage. But you see, this is because we don't have journalists any longer interested in finding out or pursuing power, pursuing the powerful. We have journalists interested in winning the next election for their favorite team.
But you know why that is, right, John? You know why that is. The source of all our ills are best quantified by a quote from Rothschild. I care not who makes a nation's laws as long as I have control of the nation's currency. And using that currency that they print out of thin air, 6.66 trillion here on the back of this pandemic by the Federal Reserve, they bought up everything. They control everything. Reuters, AP, they control all of it. And I'm enraged because so many people are sitting back saying, all's going well. The plan is going beautifully. Meanwhile, our friends in Canada just had their guns banned.
Well, I think the plan is going beautifully, but not that plan. I'm talking about the plan that we as Christians believe in. Because at the end of the day, Sean, I really do believe that this does have to get worse for it to get better. I believe nothing good comes easy. What we have done is we in the free world, we in Ireland, no race in Europe fought harder for their freedom than the Irish did. And as soon as we got it, we took our eye off the ball, and we spent the last 100 years messing around, and our country has been taken from us again. So I do believe that this was coming to us. This is a hard lesson, but I think, and it's going to get a lot harder over the coming weeks, but I do really feel it will lead to a great awakening back to what is important and to our fundamental Christian beliefs, that we have to cherish the important things like the truth and everything that it means to be Christian, and that we will never let go of freedom in the free world again, or at least we must remember that if we are to preserve freedom, that it must be protected every single day. So I think, the hardship that people are going through, it's making them realize, we in Ireland here now, as a result of this case that we're taking, people are learning about their constitution. They're learning articles of their constitution. They're learning they have free speech. They're learning that they have a right to be in their property without, this is sort of ingrained in Americans, but not here. It's not so much here. And it's been a wonderful process. People are learning, wow, they can stand up to the police and they can demand their rights because they have a constitution, the rights in which are given to them, not by man, but by God. It's very clear in our Constitution who gives us our rights and that they are inalienable. So it is, as you call it over there, the Great Awakening. And I think it is going to get harder before it gets better, but it's going to get better. And when it does get better, I think it's going to be better than it's ever been, because it's going to bring so many people back to God.
My warning to everyone listening is that tyrants don't care that our rights are given to us by God. Tyrants like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, do not care about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. And tyrants will be tyrants. So it is up to us to retake our freedom, not just to ask for it, but to demand it. Final word from you, John, because I've just had it. And we need to take our freedom back, because if we're going to just wait for this thing to get worse before it gets better, we're going to end up like Palestine.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting everyone should wait. I think the harder it gets, people will start to say, whoa, we've had enough of this, and they will get out onto the streets.
I know. That's what we're seeing in California. That's what we're seeing.
That's what I mean.
Absolutely. We're seeing it in the state of Minnesota. We're seeing it in Michigan. And absolutely, red-blooded Americans will rise. I want red-blooded Irish to rise as well.
Green blood. Sean, just before John finishes, can I just say that on this day 103 years ago, when our leaders, our great patriots 104 years ago, were walking to their deaths, they were spat at in the street by Dubliners. They were spat at by Dubliners who gave food to the British armed forces, who then went on to kill our greatest patriots. And it was only in the years that followed that people realized the sacrifice. We at the moment, are being pilloried, and there's a massive campaign by the establishment to try and destroy us, and character assassination. So this is the course of history. We know this. This is what happens. But we are starting the revolution here, and we only have to look back 100 years. It's very fresh in our minds, our generation, because it was spoken about a lot when we were growing up. So, we are ready to fight. People will fight. They've always fought to take back Ireland. That's core to our history. So, sorry, John.
Yeah, Sean, you see, I think that, this is it's a kind of a slow process, but it's moving relatively fast, considering the ruthlessness and haste of our opponents. Because the big problem we have is the necessity to educate people out of a state of almost hypnotic trance as a result of corrupt media and the constant pummeling of people on a daily, nightly basis with the same messages, and you can see it very strongly now in this crisis, that many people are actually in a state of stupor from the kind of stuff, the fear that they're being pummeled with, and the misinformation and so on. And our job is to educate people as much as we are taking on the state, and that's a kind of a mechanical function we have to undertake. There's the function of using that to educate people to the importance of their constitution. People don't, I meet young people, they have no idea. They think, I had an argument with a guy in the street the other day, and I was saying, he said, what are you on about? And I said, freedom. And he said, what does that mean? And I said, if you don't know what that means, you're in trouble, And he says, and I explained to him, well, you're free, you're standing here, I'm free, I'm standing here, I'm talking to you, you're talking to me. And he was thought about this, and he says, well, is it a kind of a cost-benefit analysis you're talking about? And I said, no, it ain't. No, it ain't. It's freedom. And people don't get this, and they don't understand how things work. I find younger people do not know how things are done, that in a sense that they're what they think are just naturalistic, spontaneous phenomena. The right to walk around is something that is actually built over time. It is bolted together by intelligent beings who know that this does not exist naturalistically, and that you have to create it and preserve it and maintain it with your blood and your life if necessary. And that's kind of the project that we have to make things visible to people that they think are not there, that they can't see, that are invisible to them. And that's kind of, the Constitution is full of that kind of stuff. And people don't know anything about it. I mean, people say, oh, well, I don't agree with you. I don't see the importance of the Constitution. Well, if you don't, you're in trouble, because that everything you think you can do naturally is yours only because of that document. and they look at you as if you've got two heads. So this is the project, and all of the things that Jim and I have been talking about tonight. The history of Ireland, which is a colonial history, and we're in a post-colonial phase, which is like a deep psychological, psychic complexity that is not understood in Ireland because it's never talked about. It's the idea we suddenly woke up the day after the independence and just jumped out of bed as if we had been always free. That doesn't happen, and we're still not free. Our minds are not free. Our hearts are not free. Pierce left us in this situation because he didn't have time to finish his project, which was to educate the people. He was fundamentally an educator. He was an artist and educator. And he didn't do that. It is our job to carry that job on now, a century later. And that's kind of what we're doing. As much with this case, we're doing that with this case as much as we are fighting the state in a mechanical, legalistic sense. We're also doing it to demonstrate, in the same way that Pierce demonstrated by his final acts and death, that we can free ourselves from slavery and from ignorance by action, based on knowledge of reality and knowledge of the human structure and knowledge of the infinite reality and of God.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you both for doing what you're doing, because I know you both take endless heat for speaking truth. The enemy has paid trolls in their camp, in their arsenal, in their army, and they dispatch those trolls. Gemma, I see it on your Twitter all the time. So we'll have to stick together. We'll stick together on this one. I got your back, guys. How do we help support you and your efforts? Gemma?
Well, GemmaO'Doherty.com. You can watch my live streams most days, and at GemmaOD1 on Twitter, where I'm regularly suspended.
I would say to people who in America who love Ireland, and there are many, many of them, I meet them anytime I'm there, to start to kind of really take an interest in what's actually happening in Ireland now. Park the romantic idea of Ireland, because sorrowfully it is not available any longer, or for the moment perhaps, but just put it like that. And to begin to take an interest in what might be done by America and by Irish America within that to help Ireland, because we desperately need help. Because, in all honesty, it has to be said that many of our troubles emanate from America, not through any fault of their American people, but because of the corruption of the corporate sector, which comes to Ireland to dodge tax. Essentially, we're basically a prostitute nation in that sense. Again, sadly, but we can't help it. The Irish people mostly are powerless over these policies, except that they refuse to vote out the people who are doing it. So I would say, take an interest, get involved, come here and start to look at Ireland and ask, is this the Ireland that you thought existed? And maybe then ask, what can we do to help? Because we do need help. We need rescuing in many senses. We need the President of the United States to take a deeper interest in Ireland, because the policies of the American government are having a deeply deleterious effect on our culture and our economic life and our capacity to self-sustain through time. So that's what I would say generally. Take an interest. Get involved in Ireland. Ireland is in all modesty, we can say that Ireland is an iconic nation in the world, for America as much as for many other countries. But we're in trouble now. We're struggling. We're dying as a nation. We need some help. Thank you.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate you. And Gemma, thanks for arranging this.
Thank you, Sean, as always, and thank you so much for all of your incredible work and wakening up so many people all around the world, not just in America.
Oh, back at you. Thank you. I'm just very blessed to have a platform. So it's my honor and my privilege to have you guys on and share my platform with you to help give you a voice. And John, I will try to remember to link to your article from firstthings.com. Freedom isn't just another word.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Take care. God bless.
Thank you, guys. Friends, thanks so much for tuning in. We do appreciate you. I'm going to remind you all that the SGT podcast is now available on iTunes. It's called The Propaganda Antidote. So for those who prefer MP3s and listening to this stuff on the go, especially these longer format interviews, head over to iTunes and search for The Propaganda Antidote. It's the SGT Report podcast. And friends, for real news 24/7, you can visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda and Mockingbird mainstream media lies. God bless, guys. Bye-bye.
Everybody knew this was coming. Here it is. You can call it whatever you want, but it's tyranny. And it's tyranny for the whole enchilada, the entire world. Keep in mind, you were given freedom of choice and the divine spark. And you need to defend those things with everything you have.